Hey, Kara, thank you so much for speaking with us today.
Sure, thanks for having me.
How the heck did you get started selling your stuff? Like when did that crossover happen where you were like, okay, I made something and then strangely someone said, hey, could you make me one? And then you thought, well, I could make money off of this, that story.
I've always been interested in making money, I think, and selling things. And when I was little, I would do art shows where we would draw pictures and then sell them to my mother, and she would be forced to buy them from us. And that was the beginning of my retail experience. But when I went to college, I studied psychology and art and theater. And when I left college, I was working at a costume shop, but then I started working at a department store. So I have brick and mortar experience. I was a department manager there. And just along the way, I did craft shows with my own work. I used to quilt and do knitting, and I've done wholesale to people in like local knit shops and that kind of thing. And I started a wedding cake business. I went back to school for my master's in counseling psychology, decided I didn't want to do that. So I went back to school again, got a pastry art certificate, and started a wedding cake business. And I was doing that out of my home for about 18 years. And then I started selling online also. And that transitioned into just selling online. So now I have an Etsy shop and a standalone website, and I sell products from both of those. And last year I did about $100,000 in product sales, just products. So I have experience online, home-based business, brick and mortar, working wholesale for different shops. I've got a lot of background in retail, but I just like selling things.
What does your day look like? I mean, that's a lot of volume.
Yeah.
For cake accessories. Like, what are you doing now?
Well, primarily my primary income is selling actual products. So I do cake decorations, I do cake decorating supplies, but then I discovered that other people like soap makers and candle makers are buying my molds and that kind of thing. So I'm selling to a lot of different types of business owners who are looking for kind of specialized products, because the things that I make you can't find in stores. Either I'm designing them myself or I'm just making molds that you can't really find other places. So I get a lot of customers looking for kind of specialized, customized things like that. And that's why I'm getting the specific type of volume that I get.
And so about what percentage of your revenue is bespoke or custom work?
Most of it is ready to ship, because I found that that's the best business model for volume. If you're doing volume, a lot of custom work is going to slow you down, but I probably get about 10% of my customers need a specific color or a specific design, or they'll write to me and say, can you do this? And so I'll come up with the design myself and that kind of thing.
Okay, gotcha. That's perfect.
Yeah.
And then how can you help other people, or how do you help? Because you obviously do.
Mm-hmm.
How do you help other people to do what you do or to be successful in selling their crafts?
Well, I feel very strongly that people who are artists should be able to sell their stuff and get what they're worth and get a living wage from their art. And I know that a lot of artists aren't business minded like that. So I put together a couple of courses. One is about kind of productivity and why you get in your own way, and that's a lot of our problems. And the other one is specifically for e-commerce and all of the pieces that go together in selling online. And my experience has made it very easy to put all this stuff into one place, because I think that people need to go in and actually treat this as a business. And that's the missing piece. I think for a lot of people who are creative, it's very difficult to switch over to that mindset. And my goal is to get them into that mindset and to make them feel okay about selling their work and asking for what it's worth when they're selling it.
That's so interesting that just the way you phrased it.
Mm-hmm.
I think that from my experience, watching creatives move from no one's ever going to like this to I'm making $100,000 a year.
Mm-hmm.
I see them go through 2 or 3 different epiphanies or paradigm shifts.
Mm-hmm.
The first paradigm shift that I usually see, and you tell me what you think, the first paradigm shift I see is, wow, people are going to pay me to do this? Like, that's the first shift. The second shift is I have a business. Like
That's, yeah.
they get online, a few things sell. And the first thing that sells is usually I hear, oh my gosh, I can't believe someone bought something. And the very next thing that comes out of their mouth is, it'll probably never happen again. Then once it starts, if I've noticed it, and you tell me what you think, I've noticed that if it happens once more, it's still an anomaly. But if it happens consistently, like if it's like, wow, every month I can count on some sales, then that's when they switch into, usually about 3 or 4 months into it, they go, oh, I'm a business owner. Has that been your experience?
I don't think it's that fast. I think that there are people who have been selling for years who still feel like this is all going to come crashing down because they don't have the belief in their own ability and they don't understand why other people seem to. But I agree that people will say, oh, somebody's going to pay me for this. But I think it takes longer to get into the business mindset. And part of that is understanding why you can't make that shift, because a lot of people never really make that shift into thinking I'm a business owner because they're thinking there's something that's holding them back. And with creative people, we all tend to be introverts, just to make a sweeping generalization. So we're thinking, why does someone want to pay this attention to me? And that makes them uncomfortable. And you have to figure out what's the reason that you don't think that you can be successful. Even I know people who are really successful who still think I'm a fraud, and it's the imposter syndrome and the whole thing. But it's my goal is to try to help people get over that and realize that you have to approach it from a business-like perspective. And even if you don't ever feel that you're worthy, like you're worth this, people paying you, that you are. And you should be able to make money from what you can do well, because other people can't do it. It's a skill and it's something that is marketable. So why not make money doing what you're good at?
Yeah, that's a great point.
Yeah.
We know your backstory, which is super cool, and which is like really a lot of our backstory.
Yeah, I hopped around a lot with, but I always liked making money. Yeah.
Right. So, talk to us a little bit about. You said you started with an Etsy shop in the way back, and then kind of got away from it for a while, and then went back to it. Did you, when you kind of re-entered, or after you took your after you got your certification for cake making, at that point, did you go to Etsy first? Did you go to social media first? Did you start this website first? What was your first jump into monetization?
I think that I started on Etsy first online, because at that point I was still doing the wedding cakes full time, and the recession had hit and people were dropping the size of their wedding cakes. They weren't buying as elaborate wedding cakes and that kind of thing. So I was trying to think of ways to diversify my income, because I think that's really important too, is if you should not rely just on one platform or one business if you're working for yourself. So I was thinking of ways to diversify, and Etsy had just kind of started. This was in 2011, so it had been around for a few years. And at that point, it was really known as a wedding platform. So all the brides were going on to buy flowers for their cakes or to buy wedding accessories and just kind of special things that they couldn't get in stores. So I thought if I put some sugar flowers up on Etsy, then maybe some DIY brides would, buy them. If they weren't buying a giant wedding cake, they'd buy a smaller one and decorate it themselves. And that was my first intention. And what I quickly realized was that there were other cake decorators who were buying my stuff. It wasn't brides. So I was thinking that one customer base was going to be what I was selling to, but it turned out to be an entirely different customer base. So I opened my standalone website just to have a separate place, because I also think you should definitely not just rely on one platform and have a standalone website too. But I started selling on both of those. So Etsy was first. And before I had my cake shop, I had a completely separate Etsy business where I was making knit hats. And I did that just for the heck of it. And I actually sold some. So I was like, oh, okay, this could work. But I started my Etsy shop in 2011. Then I did my standalone website soon after that. And there was 1 or 2 years where I was selling on Etsy pretty full time, plus doing the wedding cakes full time. And those years just wrecked me. I was dead. So I decided just to go with Etsy because it was less stressful. Wedding cakes are a very stressful proposition. You're constantly looking for customers. It's tasting appointments, it's deliveries, it's baking, it's like the last part of your week is just in your kitchen on your feet all day. It's very physical and people don't realize that. So I was making enough money on Etsy that I moved over there. And between Etsy and my website, I'm making a lot more now than I was making doing wedding cakes. So that's how that worked out.
Okay, perfect. So, so I was going through your Etsy as you were talking,
Mm-hmm.
and so kind of walk us through. You said you did you first you thought your customer. That's such an interesting story because I think
Yeah.
so. I hear that a lot is creative people think, oh, my target market is going to be this person over here,
Yeah.
and what they find out is like, oh, there's this whole other group over here that's going to pay me more, buy
Mm-hmm.
more of my stuff, and be more consistent with their purchases, which I think is really interesting. So talk us through your shop here, Cake to Remember, and it
Mm-hmm.
looks like you've had 27,000 sales. You have 4,110 5-star reviews. That's
Mm-hmm.
amazing. And let's see, it looks like you have, okay. So let's talk about this. This is
Okay.
very interesting. Um, where do I start? Yeah, this is very rare
Yeah.
for me to see. Okay.
Yeah.
Um, and we did research several years ago on the top 100 Etsy sellers in the handmade category, and hand scraped about 6,300 pieces of data to try to figure out what is the, what's the secret sauce?
Yeah.
How are Etsyans, these top Etsyans pulling in? And we looked at we uncovered a bunch of different interesting ratios, but without going down that rabbit hole, one of the key ratios in the top sellers was the number of listings they had.
Mm-hmm.
And the average for the top 100 handmade sellers, the average was 500 listings.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if you take the outliers out, we had a couple of big outliers. Then it comes down to, I think it came down to about almost 300, 250, 300.
Mm-hmm.
But a lot of people think, well, I'm going to put something up on it. I'm going to open an Etsy shop, and they focus on photography, and their photography's good. They have decent, they have some baseline good SEO going on. They have some decent descriptions, and then they list 5 items.
Yeah, that's not going to help. That's not going to fly. Yeah.
Yeah. So this is very interesting to me. So it looks like edible butterflies. Is that your main, the bulk of you?
That and the molds. Yeah, the molds down. I mean, if you add up all of the molds that I have, it's more than the edible butterflies.
Okay.
So they're all kind of separated out.
I see. So
Yeah.
So is there a difference between, is it a different type of person that orders edible butterflies as opposed to molds? Is there?
Yeah. Yeah. Do you want me to talk about that?
Yeah, that's really
okay.
Cool.
I know my customers pretty well, and I know how they work and how they think. All right. So the people who are buying the wafer paper and the edible butterflies tend to be people who are decorating a personal cake for themselves or their kids, or just some kind of a special occasion. And they're buying something simple, and then they're dressing it up themselves, or they're making something simple and they need a decoration that they don't have to make themselves. And that's kind of one customer base. So I have a lot of listings because that's part of my strategy. And that 1,000 listings was my goal for last year. And I finally did it just about 2 months ago. But there are ways you have to understand how Etsy works if you're going to sell on Etsy. And it's just, part of it is a numbers game. part of it is just having specific things, but back to what I was saying about understanding my customers, the people who are buying the wafer paper is kind of a different market than the people who are buying the molds, because the people who are buying molds are making things. And a lot of times they're making things to sell to other people. So for that, I have a lot of listings because I have some really specific, unusual molds that you can't find from other places, because I use vintage jewelry. I love the antiques mall. I go there to buy things to make molds from because they're old and you can't find them other places. And people who are making things, and people use them for soap embeds and, like I said, candle making and candy and cake decorating. I think I tend to think in terms of cake decorating. But let's say you have a cake that you need to make for a dentist and you need a mold of a toothbrush. I can do that. So the molds are kind of a separate customer base. And the reason I have so many is because I have a lot of unusual ones, and they might only sell once a year. But that's okay for me because on Etsy, it only costs, 60 cents to list it for the year. And that's just part of the cost of doing business. That's part of my expenses. But when you get into having so many molds, you're going to come up in search a lot more. Because if people ask, people are searching for, depending on what keywords you're using, ornate mold for wedding cake. I'll come up in those searches a lot because I have so many different styles of molds. And it's just a matter of, volume and being seen. And if you want to rely on Etsy traffic, you need to give Etsy what it wants and have a lot of listings. If you're using other methods to drive traffic to your shop, then you can send that to a website or to Etsy or wherever you want. But there's just things that I have that you can't find in other places. And all of my silicone is food safe. And that's a big difference because a lot of silicone is not food safe. And for cake decorators, that's an important thing.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And I can see you have like, looks like D&D gaming dice.
Yeah.
Who would ever think to put that on there?
You know what? People buy those. I made that set by a customer request. They said, can you make a dice set? And I said, well, I can do parts of it. I can't make 3D dice with the type of silicone that I use. But she was going to use them to make chocolate cupcake toppers. So people use them for all kinds of things that I would never think of. But when they write to me, I was like, oh, okay, well, if this one person's using it, then someone else is going to. And so I just listed in my shop. That probably has sold, I don't even know how many times. I probably sold like 3 or 4 of them. And I've had it up in my shop for about a year. But because it's there, people will find it. And I get a lot of traffic from Google for that particular item also. So it's the kind of thing that you might have something in your shop for years and it never sells. But then when it does sell, it doesn't matter because it doesn't cost that much to list on Etsy and you're still making a profit.
Yeah, that's a great point. So getting back to that last point, if I'm looking at your shop and I see 1,000, first of all, congratulations on your on your 1,000. That's fantastic.
Why, thank you.
I think that's an absolutely amazing goal. Mm-hmm. So I think that's a super helpful bit of advice that, it does only cost 60 cents for it to sit online on a platform that gets, that's got 170 or 150 million users, depending on what metrics you're.
Exactly. Yeah.
It's insane. And that you can start the shop for free. And yeah, there's some costs associated with, with selling and things like that, but it's still, like you said, having an Etsy shop and then eventually funneling some of that traffic or some of those relationships into your own site that you control 100%, and building a list and that kind of thing. So have you found, 1,000 is a good number. That's a number that, we can do some cowboy math here. Have you found that the Pareto principle, 80-20 in your sales, in other words, usually what I find in looking at businesses, whether it's online or Etsy or creative or real estate or otherwise, is usually about 20% of the effort, 20% of the product is bringing 80% of the revenue. Are you finding that offset in your business?
Yeah, that's probably fairly accurate. I haven't done the exact breakdown, but especially on Etsy, the way that it works is that if you sell something, it goes to the kind of more prominent position in search results for a while, so it tends to sell again. And it does, you will start seeing patterns, and I definitely see some things I sell all the time, some things hardly ever sell. And generally when I'm thinking, oh, I'm going to take this out of my shop, that's when it sells. But the majority of sales are from a smaller group of items, and it can go in waves where something is trendy and you sell more of it. It can go just because Etsy is showing it to more people. There's no really predicting what it is. So the 1,000 listings is not a requirement by any means. So I don't want people to think that they have to have 1,000 listings, because that's really unrealistic for most shops. But for me, it's the kind of thing where I make everything as they're ordered. I don't have things in stock sitting around waiting to ship out. So it's easy for me to have 1,000 listings, and then I just make them as they're ordered. But definitely you do get, most of my sales come from a smaller percentage of that, as far as the listings go. Definitely. Yeah.
Okay. So speaking to that, is there a strategy for continuing the momentum of the sale? So in other words, let's say you sell, let's go to something here that's really cool. I mean, these are fantastic pictures, by the way. Oh, here's cool. This Zoo Animals cake wraps. That's so cool. So looking at this cake wrap, and this would be presumably something that either, a mom making a cake would generate for her young person, or for her child, or, cake maker who is selling it could use these. So someone orders this, and maybe you have, this is hypothetical, you have 3 of these sell in a week period of time. So Etsy is going to, one of Etsy's algorithms is going to go, wait a minute, this has some momentum for whatever reason. I'll just mention, I don't want to go too deep into how algorithms work and that kind of thing, but what Etsy's job is to sell.
Yes.
Etsy's job is to generate revenue, because they can't attract investor money on Wall Street or in the markets without showing quarterly results. Okay, to make it simple. So their goal and our goal as sellers is aligned, right? Because when I go to the grocery store, I can't buy groceries with the number of likes or people who follow me. I can't say, well, I have 1,000 followers. They'll look at me like, well, sir, security. They want dollars. And so my interest in getting dollars into my bank account, and Etsy's interest in getting dollars into their bank account, we have a symbiotic relationship. So what Etsy, in my opinion, and according to my research, is when your item sells, when this Zoo Animal cake wrap sells 3 in 1 week, what Etsy doesn't know, what the algorithm, which is just a computer, it's HAL, from 2001. It's just, it's not a person.
Yeah.
When HAL from 2001 says, wait a minute, this seller just sold 3 Zoo Animal cake wraps. What it doesn't know, and what it's trying to figure out is this a trend? Were these mentioned on Oprah? Is there something out there that the general public is going to start ordering these? And if they are, we want to push those up in search a little bit. We want to help. They're basically catching a wave, for a surfing analogy. So my question is that, and that, of course, that's just for the listeners, right? Because some people may not understand that, and they think that SEO is some, super magic stuff, and it's not. It's just it's actually pretty sophomoric. The math behind it is sophisticated, but the goal is pretty sophomoric. So here's my question: is there a way to juice that ride? Is there a way to go, wait a minute, I just sold 3 of these in a week. And I know that the algorithm is going to give me some love. How can I just give that a little momentum? Is there a way to do that?
You can do it. The problem with trying to ride the wave is that you have to catch the wave before it breaks, right? So if you see that there is some momentum on some of your listings, you can go on social media and try to push your own traffic. Etsy doesn't care where the traffic comes from if there are sales being made. So if you're trying to keep that momentum, and Etsy does give your listings a little more prominence in search if they actually sell. It doesn't really care if they get likes and that kind of thing, but if they sell, they will show them more prominently on the search results page. So if you see that happening and you want to kind of push it a little bit more, you can post on social media, here's a recent bestseller. And Etsy actually lets you do that. If you're on the Sell on Etsy app, you can use their social media function to post directly to Instagram, and it gives you a little option to say my best sellers. It will give you that choice. So you can go and do it directly from Etsy. It'll lead people back to the Etsy shop. And the more sales that you direct to Etsy yourself, the more likely Etsy is going to continue to show your listings. It's difficult to do that unless you're really paying attention and you really stay on top of it. But there are ways to do it. It's just something you have to really pay attention to. And if you're a little too late to the game, then it might not be a timely thing. It might not help you any, But one thing that's a benefit that handmade sellers can do is to pay attention to what is trending, because if you can hop on that trend, then you can really ride the wave, like you said. Because, for example, last year, the little unicorn cupcakes were really popular. Have you seen the little unicorn cupcakes? And I designed a mold that you could do the little horn and the ears without having to make them by hand. Yeah, type in unicorn. It's that little mold right at the top, okay? Now, at the time, there was nothing like that on the market, and I think people have started making them now, but also the trend is over. So it's not, they're still out there. That's the unicorn cupcake. They're still out there, but it's not as hysterical a trend as it was last year. So last year, I was selling these like crazy. And these are customer photos that they sent me, and they let me use in the listings. So that's the kind of thing, if you have a relationship with your customers, you say, oh, those are great. Can I use the picture? Then they're going to be happy. And, but you have to, as small businesses, we have the ability to hop on a trend. If you see something happening in your industry, you can jump on that and have a product ready tonight. And I do that a lot. If I see something happening that is suddenly gaining momentum, I don't have to go to a committee. I don't have to go to designers. I can just make something and put it up, and it's there, and people start buying it. And as soon as that happens, Etsy will give your shop more attention. They'll give that listing more attention, and it all benefits you in the long run.
I think that's a great tip. Just real quick, of having, I think that's a genius tip, of having customers who have sent you pictures.
Oh, yeah.
Asking them permission. And so 2 questions there, just tactically. Number 1, how do you get more of your customers to send you pictures? And number 2, what do you need to do for permission? Do you just email them and say, hey, can I use this? And then they email back and say yes, and then you just archive that email, or how do you do it?